you say?
You can pull this out of my clenched cold hands, or something like that, paraphrased.
Yes, and why do you think I'm showing this thing?
Because you know I was in the audience.
Because I'm not handing this back.
Thanks, Andy. I'll shoot you with that.
That's the end of our presentation. Thank you very much.
How much do they retail for, by the way? I don't know. How much are they selling for?
Cheapest ones I think are 3,000 something,
3,000.
and then they go up to 5,000 something for the more expensive.
I'm just worried because my wife wants to get one. With our money.
It's interesting, Andy's talk. Clearly any discussion from a people framework must involve product, must involve this. In terms of my own personal perspective, and as I mentioned, I'm an Apple fan, but if I could briefly share with you my top three, there's a program called SoundNote. Basically, if I had it on now, and as I'm typing, notes, recollection of this conversation, it's recording the audio and recording the point in time where I type something. So I have my notes and I say, I really want to listen to Andy's part about not giving that back again. And in my notes I have, send Andy email. So I click on that in this SoundNote program and it takes me to the point in time in the audio file where this is being talked about. This, I think, has some application for language. Equally as much, there's one, Andy mentioned it's not yet a replacement for his notebook. I definitely support this. It's not for me either at the moment, but I have recently found an application that enables me to connect anywhere in a Wi-Fi network to my desktop computer, access any program. So where it won't play Flash natively, if I access my desktop computer and it just displays through the iPad, then it does play Flash websites. And I can get email, any document, and so on. They talk about working in the cloud. They talk about this in relation to I no longer need to have all my work documents, all my resources, all my knowledge with me. I carry around a portable hard drive, in other words. At least it's how you store things, maybe. But if they're somewhere on the internet, I can usually access them. This is what's meant by the cloud, somewhere sort of out there. So SoundNote, Desktop Connect, and one I'll share with you in a moment that sort of talks about maybe the future of ebooks, how these can become more interactive. So, maybe that's not working. So what I'd like to suggest is this consideration of a networks teacher. From a personal perspective, I've been studying my doctorate for too long now, but I expect to hand it in soon. As a researcher, I'm constantly aware of the need to keep up to date. At a very pragmatic level, the point in time when I had to hand in my literature review again, it had to reflect current understanding, current knowledge. So how do you keep track of all these different things? Maybe through this notion of RSS. In other words, information from websites that gets sent to you, rather than you having to go to a number of large general databases. This is definitely possible. As I mentioned, there's the notion of social networks. SHTM have set up a Delicious website. Delicious is basically an online set of bookmarks, collectively as a school. So if I find something interesting relating to an area I teach in SHTM, I add it to Delicious, to this collective intelligence, and tag it. So I write descriptive words that describe why I found it delicious, what area. And then anyone in SHTM, in particular new staff, can go in and tap into that knowledge that over a number of years has developed. This, I think, has a lot of strength. Sort of like, why reinvent the wheel? But equally as much, if I broadly search across an area on the internet, I'll get, hundreds of thousands of returns, depending on how skillful I am at searching. So this is where maybe tapping into the energy someone's already taken to identify some of these key resources is useful. For some reason, this has stopped working. So then I'd like to move, we've heard sort of from a teacher perspective now to a student perspective. This was not my first mobile phone. I'm not quite that old, but it does sort of talk about here the change. If you look here, it's basically this person's going to the south and, you know, I want a 30 gig hard drive, MP3 player, GPS, megapixel camera, high definition camcorder, and this was from about 2007 from my memory. He could here be asking for an iPhone, and this was presented as a joke about 3 years ago, that this person needs, well, I actually just want to be able to call somebody. Ken Robinson talks about some scenario with his daughter, and he says to his daughter, why don't you wear a watch? And she says, well, I don't need one. It's a single function device. This is not reflective of my life anymore. If I want to know the time, I will get out my phone, because I'm getting out my phone more often than maybe looking at this. But at the same time, there's, you know, fashion, so on and so on, other overlays there. Oh, I forgot to warn you. Sorry. I don't know if I've used this in other sessions before, but this highlights change of behavior for me. New syntax. I'm not quite sure how you answer the phone if this is a scenario, or how you would use it in a mobile language learning scenario. Maybe because it's close to her ear, she can hear the audio more clearly. I'm not quite sure. But if we're thinking about change of behavior, and this overlaps in part to Andy's point before about maybe the computer, the mobile device being distracting. When Andy was talking, I was looking around the room, and I was thinking, when I was in school, or even at university, what did I do if I was distracted? Probably on a piece of paper, I would doodle. I would draw things, okay? If I have my laptop out, it's more obvious that I'm not paying attention. Or it's more obvious the task in hand is related to this, maybe. So it sort of depends on sort of what you're doing, I think, in the teaching scenario to make sure that they're not distracted. Because, I mean, students, like Andy has rightly identified, will probably be doing these sort of things anyway. I will give you next week a digital photo frame, a small calendar, souvenir from a project I'm managing at the moment. You can put photos in it. You can tell me where I took this photo 1 day ago. Generation Mobile. Have a stab in the dark. I've already told you where I was shopping at the beginning of this talk.
Festival Mall.
Yeah, good.
I was first.
Okay, I think so. Just maybe. So I'll definitely send you.
I don't want any.
And there's obviously here depicting the change of the impact of technology, the mobile devices in particular. This is a Chinese cultural perspective from a student perspective. I'll give you a moment to read through it.
How many phone numbers does the lead bank have then? Does it give a different number to each girl? Can't get physical with a call by SMS.
Three.
So anyway, this speaks similarly to me of change of behaviour, change of our students' behaviour at least. It's interesting when Andy did an informal poll, who is at this point in time willing to admit they have an iPhone or other sort of smart device. My question in this regard is, who still plans to be teaching in about 5 years? Who's the last is Angelio?
I was retired then.
And the question is, who's on a mobile phone plan that will finish within the next 2 years? So then the question becomes relating to, well, what would you buy? And from today's discussion, would you then consider what you're buying as relating to the sort of affordances that at least Andy and I will talk about? So it is a sense, as I mentioned before, not a question of if but when in terms of timing. So as I mentioned also, there's a sense of overlap here, products. And it's a little hard to narrowly look at one without looking at the other. There's very simply two broad categories of mobile applications, a device-based one and a web-based one. If I was asking you before, the key characteristics of mobile learning. In your mind, you probably had some example of a mobile learning application, a mobile learning event, a teaching scenario. In the past, if I asked people, describe one of these for me, most people would say, oh, I can set it up so students can do a quiz. They can answer a quiz with their mobile phone. Or maybe flashcards, glossary. These are some of the typical things that would be mentioned in this. And what often comes up as a problem is, one, what device do I, as I mentioned, do I develop this application for? And two, as I'm traveling around, if say for example I'm doing the quiz, 20 questions, halfway through I go through the harbour the harbour tunnel. It's gone. Students, very frustrating, and equally as much if you're research, you're doing something that means you have to be connected. These problems now have been solved though, if they're being done and being developed in a smart way. A lot of applications, unless obviously, well actually even some of the web-based ones now, sort of keep a record of where you're up to. So if you lose the connection, not everything's lost. When the connection comes up again, it then uploads that data. Similarly, if you had your mobile phone, maybe a work-placement experience, and you're walking around taking notes, photograph of something, and through the click of a button you can put this on a website. And this is sort of collecting evidence at a point in time that then can be used at a different point in time. From my own personal perspective in terms of this as well, I'm not a Cantonese native speaker. You can probably have picked or worked this out at the beginning. But I am trying to develop my Cantonese language skills. So what I do is, in particular for food, I like dining. And in particular, say for example, if we're out, Dai Pai Dong or some other restaurant, and I'll ask, food I like, how do you pronounce this? How do you say this? And with the phone, I'll get them to say it. There's a voice recorder, it's free. Okay? And then maybe in my notes, I have a food file. So I will write down how I think it sounds. It's not probably correct, but it makes sense to me. So I know at a future point, oh, that vegetable dish with the beans and the green and the pork and the chiliness that I really like, sei guai dao, I think it is. So I remember this. So this, from a personal perspective, is maybe how I'm starting to collect and use these sort of things for my Cantonese language learning. Equally as much from a student perspective, if you think about it, as they're walking around, how do you say this? How do you say this? It's in particular for idioms or some slang phrases. I was telling my project assistant, who is a local person, and he asked me something that was for a deadline, and I said, look, we need to play it by ear at this stage. And he said, what means? You want me to record the audio so you can listen to it later? And I said, no, it means be flexible. So he wrote that down in his phone in Chinese characters. So this is equally interesting, I think. And then there's, as you mentioned in terms of product, there's a lot of applications. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on these now because there's too much to look at. I think from a language learning perspective, I'll share with you a few, but equally as much, there's a wealth of resources in this area, far beyond what we can cover today. Some of them are listed here in terms of applications that are written specific for a mobile device. Then there's ones here where websites are written, so it knows when you're connecting to the website from a mobile device. For example, Facebook here changes its layout completely if you're accessing it through a phone or similarly through the iPad. This then is, if you're looking for something, one large database of Java-based mobile applications. You could search for language learning in your subject area. The URL is in the resource booklet that I've given you. If we're looking at products and along the similar lines of what's coming in the future, I'll finish today's session with a brief video about what's possibly coming. This is a prototype of a phone from Nokia. Then I'm not quite sure if this is coming, but the only certainty about predicting the future is that you'll be wrong. They talk about, I think, some sort of Minority Report sort of thing, Matrix style. This is probably closer. So they're talking about mobile devices here.